Howdy and welcome, folks, to today's KKE, all about K1000 organizations. My name's Ron, and I've got Andrew and Shane with me here as usual. We got a few preliminaries to go through. We want to make sure that everybody's aware of our backyard boot camp program. One of my favorite things here. Andrew and I just went to California last week. You can see we've crossed off the first one of the year, and it was course, wildly successful, had a great time, taught lots of customers all kinds of cool stuff. If you want to check it out, you can see the URL there, and Andrew has dropped it into the chat window. Also, you can save that for later perusal. We got one coming up next month. Andrew's going to be heading out to Herndon, Virginia, and we got more coming up later in the year, as you can see there. It's classroom-based training, folks. You get hands-on in a nice, safe playground that we provide for you. Your very own K1, K2 if you sign up for both classes, that you get to play with and get hands-on, learn all the latest new features, etc. Lots of time to interact both with the trainers and to interact with your fellow customers. You can learn a lot and you have fun while you're doing it, folks. Really is an awesome thing. Check out BBK. We got a whole bunch more resources for you too if you don't like that. You're starting from left to right here. The green box, software.dell.com/case training, where you can find all of the resources that we make available to our customers that fall under the rubric of teaching you how to use your appliances. We've got Jumpstart, of course. Every single appliance we sell comes with Jumpstart. Backyard Boot Camp, you can find out all about it there as well. KKE, just one of the many ways that you can find our program, folks. The past recordings and the future topics coming up, and InkPad, our regular newsletter that we send out with all kinds of cool little helpful pro tip and tips and tricks type articles for you. You can find those there as well. ITninja.com, you can interact with all your peers, right? And quite a few of us case regulars appear there as well, sharing all kinds of cool information in blog posts and how to deploy various software applications and virtually anything and everything that relates to your IT jobs. You can find information about on that site, and you can collaborate with other like-minded folk on various solutions. Support.software.dell.com, in the middle of the page, is the home site for all things related to your case and other Dell software brethren support. You can open support tickets if you need help from a case. Of course, before you do that, you can search our huge library of KB articles related to just about every subject you might need to with regard to your case appliances. You can find our training resources on that site, and our KB articles and our KKEs, etc., are all there as well. Case.uservoice.com. If there is a feature you would like to see added to our products or an improvement to a feature, you can absolutely go there and log that request. You can vote on requests that are logged by others. You can see direct feedback from our programmers, our engineering staff on that website. You can see when we plan to implement features. You can give feedback directly to those engineers as to how you'd like features implemented and so on. And then the connect.case.com website, you can see a special link just for our KKE goers there, /join/KKE. Here's where you can go sign up and become one of our insiders, folks, right? Not only can you, of course, take part in fun surveys and questions and games and whatnot, win prizes, and then turn in your prizes, or rather win points and then turn in your points for prizes. But most importantly, you can get a sneak preview of anything that we have coming up in the future. When we're ready to show off what's coming up, the first folks to see it are the registrants at Connect, right? Long before the rest of our customer base gets to see our new features and our new versions, etc., we've made it available to the folks there on Connect, so you definitely want to register. Sign up there, folks. Andrew's thrown all these links into chat for you to save. And our current K1000 and K2000 versions, you can see the version numbers right here on screen in front of you. You might check out your case appliance and see if you're up to date. And you might find that you need a few upgrades to get to this latest version. Might be more than one hop to get you there. But it's important that you understand everything we cover in a KKE session is always current as of the most recent version. So if we show you a feature today or we talk about something today and you don't have it in your appliance, it's probably because you're not upgraded to the latest version. And we've done KKEs on how to upgrade in the past. You can go find those in the archive if you want a little help, a little refresher before you tackle that particular process, especially if it might be multiple hops. You can always read the release notes on each version to see what prior versions you can come from. Okay? So you can see the current version of the server and agent on the K1, the server and RSA on the K2, and our K1000 Go mobile app, which if you aren't using, folks, you really should be. And now, today's topic, organization, or orgs for short, and that's how most of us here refer to it. Just a really long word, right? So we've broken down the topic thusly. We're going to cover some of the concepts, the whys and the wherefores before we get into actually turning it on and using it. Okay? Then the setup, there's some initial setup to get the feature enabled in your K1000. Then we move on to actually designing and configuring, and I probably should have put design first because you really need to think it out before you actually turn it on and implement it. Right? There's a lot of potential gotchas if you don't do it in the right order here. So we'll cover that and configuring it and using it, and then of course, as always, some time for Q&A at the end. So those concepts I mentioned, what are organization? What is this feature, right? Well, right now, if you don't have it enabled in your K1, then you have essentially one single K1000, one physical or virtual K1000, and one logical K1000 writing on that physical or virtual hardware, right? Well, if you enable the orgs feature, then you can essentially carve up your K1000 into multiple logical K1000s. And we'll describe this more as we go on, but each individual org has its own complete K1000 database, and they are separate from each other, okay? Distinct and distinguished from each other, right? So it means that you could have multiple business units, and each one could have essentially their own K1000. You only have to pay for one K1, right? And theoretically, you can have an unlimited number of the logical organizations within a single K1000. We'll talk more about that as we go on. But each org can be managed completely separately from the others. You can have a different group of administrators, a different group of regular plain old users, and everything in between. Completely different inventory and labels, all the tasks, patching and scripts and managed installs and Dell updates and the security scans, and everything is completely siloed, right? And they each generate their own backup files. They are, for all intents and purposes, completely separate K1000s, all just riding on and sharing the same physical or virtual hardware underneath. Okay? And you can see here with the graphics on the right-hand side that Mr. Luchansky helped me out with. A regular K1000 is probably what you have right now, right? You have one settings and one set of users and one inventory and so forth. But if you turn on the orgs feature, we'll talk about how to do that, and you create additional orgs, again, theoretically an unlimited number, right? Then you see each of the orgs has its own settings and tasks and users and inventory and backups and so on, right? They are completely holistic, if you will, right? All riding on that system level, which is the underlying hardware. And some of the, many of the basic settings that are K1000 wide are at the system level. We'll get into that a little bit more. So now that we understand what they are, why would we use them? Well, there's two main sort of reasons or concepts as to why you might get into this feature. And it really boils down to areas of responsibility. If we think about what a K1000 is, right, it is the ability to completely manage a set of devices, right? And all that you might do to and with those devices. You can maintain inventory information on them automatically and dynamically. You can track their asset management, their life cycle management, right, from purchase to retirement. You can deploy software and uninstall software. You can script changes. You can patch them up to date. And you can do service desk ticketing, tracking across those devices, and so on and so forth. So if a K1000 is the ability to manage these devices and all that entails, then each org is the ability to manage a separate set of devices. Okay? So if we need to make some sort of logical distinctions between our devices, be it either a server versus workstation kind of thing, we have one company, one business unit, one IT department, but we want to silo servers away from not servers. Okay? We don't want to buy two K1000s, right? Don't need to. Don't have a huge, machine count. Certainly on the server side, we don't. Right? You never have nearly as many servers as you do workstations that you need to manage. So, and even though we are one IT department, we do want to make sure that, for instance, our workstation administrators can't even accidentally patch all of our servers right in the middle of the day. Right? If we accidentally do that to workstations, certainly it's not awesome, but not nearly as big a deal as if we were to do that to servers. And we know that we can use labels and things to distinguish between devices, but as long as the devices exist in the same inventory with our tasks, then we could potentially target the wrong devices with a task, right? So that's one way in which we might use orgs. The other way that we can do it is we actually have separate business units, separate IT responsible parties, distinct group of devices, and so on. You might think of regional groupings, right? We have an international company here or an international family of companies, and each one of those different business units has its own IT department, right? And they are separate and have some autonomy, and we want to make sure that the U.S. folks can't administer the European devices and vice versa. Right? We want to silo them off, but again, we don't want to purchase separate K1000s, which we of course could do. Right? So we might want to implement orgs for that. You think about other education type breakdowns of how you distinguish between devices and so forth. Right? It just depends on how you are structured, how distinct your groups of devices and your IT parties are. Right? Now, it's important, and we'll get to it a little bit later, to understand these are the pros I'm talking about organizations, but there's some very important considerations. Just because you think you might like to do this, you think, ooh, servers versus workstations, that sounds like an important distinction we might enjoy. But you got to understand that some of the considerations that come along with it. And everything in life is a value judgment. We got to make sure that not only do we like the pros, but we got to understand that some of the, I don't want to call them cons, but some of the considerations that come with employing this feature might not be worth it, right? Because they are distinct databases. There might be some limitations that we have to live with as well. So we'll get into that a little bit more as we go along. So now that we understand what organizations are, we need to know how to turn it on and how to do the initial setup of it. First step, enabling the organization's feature. Now, if you purchased, well, let me back up a step. The K1000 comes in two models, and you might not be aware of this, and we generally just refer to them as K1000s or K1s. But there are two distinct models. There's the K1100 and the K1200. And all it really boils down to, folks, is the K1200 comes with bigger, beefier hardware. Whether it's physical or virtual, that's the difference. And essentially, that just means that the K1200 can manage larger environments than a K100 would be able to handle as well, right? So the K1200, we ship every single one with orgs already enabled, okay? Whereas the 1100s come with orgs disabled, okay? And it's really simple. It's a license code feature. So when you purchase your K1000, if you bought a 1200, it came with an orgs license key already granted to you. If you purchased a K1100, it came with a non-orgs license key granted to you. So you can merely contact your sales rep, your Dell account team, if you have orgs and don't want it, or if you don't have orgs but you do want it. They will do what is necessary to get you issued the proper key. You input it into your K1000. It will reboot when you put this key, whether you are enabling or disabling orgs. It will reboot the K1000 to make that change effective. And once it comes up, you're all set and ready to go, whether you've enabled or disabled. And you can go back and forth. The important thing to keep in mind, though, is if you've been using the orgs and you have multiple orgs built in, when you get rid of them, they are gone. It might result in some data loss. So it's just important to keep that in mind. But you certainly can go back and forth, okay, should that become necessary, if you've got orgs and you don't want it, or if you don't have it and you do want it. Some considerations we can talk more about in Q&A. So once we've enabled it and our K1 is rebooted and it's come back up, we can begin the initial setup, okay? We can create as many different orgs as we want to. Now, there will already be one baked in called default. As soon as you enable orgs, or if it is already enabled, you'll see one called default. Now, you can, of course, give your names, give your orgs whatever name you want to. And you can rename it later on. And one of the important considerations when naming is certainly your administrators and your technicians, but also potentially your end users. They may see these names and may need to choose from and among them to get into the proper logical K1000 to do whatever it is they're trying to do. So you want to make sure the names make sense. Some sort of ID numbers or other obscure or algorithmic type identifiers might be a bad idea, right? You can imagine if you're a parent company with an umbrella corporation and many sub-companies, you might name the orgs by company, right? Or if you are if you're breaking it up into different classes of machines, of devices, like servers and workstations, well, that's pretty simple. We might name one servers and one workstations, okay? But you can give them whatever name you want, and you can change them if you get them wrong. If you want to change them later on, that's not a problem. Filters are very important. We'll talk about that on the very next slide. But notice that each, as I said in the beginning, each org is a separate database. And so if you're going to be connecting externally to the K1000 DB, and which we've taught you how to do in various KKEs in the past, then you will need to enable external database access for each individual org, for each individual database. And each of those databases will have a different name, org1, org2, org3, and so forth, and a different username and password, R1, R2, R3, R4, and so on for the username, and then whatever password you set for each of the orgs. And then there are each of the agent communication settings that you're used to configuring right now. How frequently devices inventory, how frequently the software catalog inventories, and so on and so forth. Each of those settings can be set differently in each org. So for instance, I probably don't need my servers to inventory nearly as often as I do my workstation, right? Because things don't change, hopefully, on our servers nearly as frequently as they do on workstations, right? So I can choose those different settings. I do need to keep in mind, however, that they're all still sharing the same number of hardware resources. So I don't want to have the total utilization because I have too many devices inventorying too frequently on the total K1000 over all my orgs, right? I don't want to use up too many resources, so I really need to balance that number, right? I want to stay within the normal guidelines for how frequently how many machines should inventory. But you can set all these things here, and if you follow my little curvy arrow there, you start at the beginning of configuring an organization with the name and the description and the report user password, and then you can go to the notification and the agent list settings, right, and then work your way down to all of the inventory intervals or all of the agent communication intervals that you can set there, okay? Now, filters. What filters are the ability to set up dynamic rules that will automatically direct newly inventorying devices into the proper org, into the proper logical K1000. If you start from them up, if we have no filters and we deploy the agent onto a computer for the very first time, and it goes to check in with the K1 for the very, very, very first time, if there are no filters or no filters that match its criteria, that match that computer, then it's going to inventory into the default org. Okay? It can indeed be moved if it's not supposed to be in the default org. It's supposed to be in one of the other orgs. It can indeed move, but that is done at the system or root level. It's going to require somebody with system administrative privileges to move devices from one org to another org. Okay? And if we're using these orgs properly, we probably don't have too many people that have permissions to more than one org. Right? We just need to keep this in mind. It may be that our filters aren't going to be 100% accurate. Maybe we're not terribly consistent in how we name our computers or where our IP subnets are, or we don't have a sophisticated and very religious devotion to structuring our Active Directory OUs and groups and things, right? And you'll notice here that we can create two different kinds of filters, one based on LDAP or Active Directory criteria, right, if the computer is in a certain OU, so forth. But we can also build filters based on inventory type data, the kind of data that we get from computers during the inventory process, IP addresses and computer names and so on, right? And we can mix and match the criteria to get it right, but it may be that some of the stuff is outside of your control. A lot of our customers that we talk to one-on-one when we do training with K1000 admins don't have full domain admin privileges to everything everywhere in the whole network. Maybe you only have access to managing things within the K1. You don't have access to AD, and the AD guy doesn't do good consistent AD structuring and computer naming and things of that nature, right? You can't rely on LDAP. Or maybe he's just not always Johnny on the spot with making sure it's done right the first time, right? And so it's not 100% reliable. Most of the time he does a good job, but sometimes he doesn't, right? So it may be that your filters don't work 100% of the time, and sometimes machines do get dumped into default and they need to be moved. It's just something to keep in mind, right? Now these filters only work on the very, very, very first initial time a device inventories with the K1. Once it's in default, it can only be moved manually. Filters will never apply to it, okay? Another potential weakness, right? If we can't get our filters to work 100% of the time, somebody needs to periodically check the default org inventory and potentially move machines. Remember, it has to be done at the system level, okay? So now we know how to set it up and do some initial configuration. Now let's talk about architecting this and actually configuring all the parts and pieces. Remember the hierarchy. We have the system sort of at the root hardware level, even if it's a virtual appliance. It still has kind of a hardware abstraction layer down there. It's managing all of the RAM and the hard drive space and all that stuff across all orgs. And then each of the orgs we have where we can log into the admin portal, each one would be a different, completely different admin portal with a different inventory and labels and patching and all that kind of stuff. And then within each org, we can specify the different permissions via our different roles so that when somebody logs into an org, they see only certain pages and can work with only certain functions of the K1000 and so forth. Right? We're going to have some Uber administrators at the system level that can manage all orgs. We're going to have some different administrators in each org, right? And then we're going to have different roles and different people, users and help desk technicians and so forth that aren't quite admins within each of those orgs. So with that said, let's note some initial differences, having orgs or not having orgs. Okay? When it's disabled, as we pointed out earlier, you just have one K1000, right? One settings, one inventory, one help desk, one patching, one managed installs, one scripting, and so forth, right? If you're an administrator, you're an administrator. You can administer everything, both the K1000 itself and all the devices and tasks within the K1000, and all your users log into one database, and everything is stored in one database. But when you have multiple orgs, and we just picked the number 4 because it fit nicely in our little graphic here, but again, you could have a theoretically unlimited number. Okay? Note that administering the K1000 itself is different and separate from administering the different devices and tasks within each of the orgs. Most of the settings get moved from the settings page you can find within admin UI. They get moved up to the system UI level, right? So you can differentiate a little bit better now, a little bit easier. You can differentiate between who can administer the K1000 and its network settings and security settings and so on, right? And who can fully administer the machines and devices and tasks within any one of the orgs. Right? Prior to having orgs, you can certainly have some level of control via the roles feature. Right? I could let people administer all of the functions and features of the K1, patching and managed installs and all the device inventory and assets and service desk and so on, but not allow them to get to the settings module at all, right? But what if I wanted them to have access to the LDAP authentication feature within settings, right? I can't do that without orgs, right? I can't do pages, intra-page permissions within my role feature, right? But if I have orgs turned on, then I can give somebody access to do the LDAP configuration within their particular org, but not be able to control all of the other K1000 server settings, right? So it makes a differentiation between those and, of course, distinguishes between each of the orgs or databases, okay? So the important considerations, and I'm gonna go top left, top right. I'm gonna go kind of in a clockwise circle here, starting on the top left. I'm gonna end up on service desk because there's kind of a we're gonna need to explain that a little bit more. So the first consideration, and the thing that drives most people to the orgs feature, is the need to separate certain devices and their administrators from other devices and their administrators. Right? Again, take the servers versus workstations. It's not sufficient for us, it is for some people, but let's say it's not sufficient for us to just make sure that our workstation admins use good labels that don't include servers when they push out their tasks. We want to make absolute certain, no way possible for a workstation guy to do anything to a server. The only option there is separate K1000s, or using the orgs feature, separate orgs, right? Because they wouldn't even have permissions to log in to the server org if we don't want them to, right? So we're differentiating between all the devices and assets and so forth. They only appear in one org, and this is going to have effects on all four of the quadrants we're looking at here, okay? Devices and things we manage in assets, they can only appear in one org. However, agentless devices, since they're just discovered and communicated with by the K1000, there's no agent that directs them to a particular org, right, after the first time they right? The agentless devices can be discovered depending on how we configure our agentless discovery schedules within all the different orgs. They could be discovered by more than one org, show up in more than one org, and therefore be using more than one agentless license. It's really important. We gotta make sure we design this well from the outset, right? Not have overlapping IP subnet scans in our discovery schedules, right? So the inventory is aggregated within each org. This can be a good and a bad thing, right? Think license compliance. When I look at the license compliance on any one page where I can see the license compliance, it is only telling me about the licenses being used, the licenses that I'm input and owning in that one org database. So depending on how I carve up my orgs, I might have some licenses that actually apply to multiple orgs. That's going to be challenging to keep track of, right? Whereas if I carve up my orgs in such a way that the licenses would only ever be used, the way I purchase them, would only ever be used by the devices inside one single org, then that makes it easy to keep track of. But I just need to remember that limitation, right? Anything that is tracking across all my devices is only tracking across all my devices within the single org. Okay? Just got to keep that in mind. Now, that leads us to reporting, top right here. Okay? Because each org is a separate database, and all of the tracking that I'm doing across all devices is really only across all devices within a particular org or database, then each org is separately reportable. If I go to my reporting module, I'm in one of the orgs. It only has access to the data within that particular database. It can only report across it. Okay? Now, some of the data is reportable at the system level, and therefore across all or multiple orgs, right? But I just need to keep in mind this distinction, right? When do I want information just about a particular org versus when do I want information across multiple or all of my orgs? Where do I report, and how does that information, how is it outputtable, right? And then we get into the K1000 licensing. I buy node licenses for devices in inventory. I get agentless asset pack licenses and so forth, right? I've got to know that though I have 5 orgs and 10,000 licenses, right, that's 10,000 licenses for all of my orgs. So I've just got to keep that in mind when I'm counting up device counts, right? I don't buy 100 licenses for this org and 200 for that org and so forth. They add up. And the K1 will tell you where you stand at all times at the system level. But you just got to keep in mind, I need to count all that up, make sure I purchase enough licenses for all of the different business units I'm going to be putting in each of the different orgs. Okay? And that's where not discovering the same device 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times with all my orgs, right, and using up duplicates, right, using up more licenses for one device than one license. You got to keep that in mind. Okay, and then coming to service desk. So the biggie here. If I have a server and a workstation breakdown, I have a workstation org and a server org, where am I going to keep my one service desk? Or am I going to have a different service desk within each of the different orgs? Because in my workstation org, the only computers that can show up and be attached and linked to tickets are the ones in that workstation org. In my server org, if I have a service desk queue, only devices in my server org can show up and be linked to my tickets, right? And that may be good, that may be bad, right? Do I want to manage and maintain two very, very similar service desks, right? That I can't go into one ticket list, show me all my tickets. If I have some tickets in one org and I have some tickets in another org, I cannot see them in one single list, okay? Because the databases are separate. They're meant to be. That's how the feature is designed. Now, if I have two queues in one org and I have some tickets in both queues, I can see them in one list, but I cannot see tickets that exist in different orgs in one single list. Okay? Very, very important that we understand that. And then the user portal customizations. A couple weeks ago, I posted to IT Ninja a blog on how to completely customize the login page of the user portal, right? Where you can embed videos and weather widgets and Twitter feeds and scrolly, blinky pop-up windows and all kinds of awesome, cool stuff that you can do on the login page of the user portal. And of course, you can change the logo, right? And if I have different queues in one org, they all use the same user portal. But if I have different service desks, right, and those service desk queues are in different orgs, they sort of do and sort of don't have their own user portal. Okay? I can customize each separately. Each org can have its own customizable user portal login page, but the problem is I don't see the customization when I go to the login page and I have not yet logged on. I don't see the different customization until I choose an org, right? Even prior to logging on. So I'm going to see the user portal logo and the user portal page from the default org until, if you give me a drop-down box of all the orgs I could log into, until I actually see that drop-down list, right? I choose one of those in the drop-down list, then I see the user portal logo and page from that particular org, which means I'm going to see the names of all of your orgs. Or you leave off the drop-down box, I have to know the exact name of the org and type it into that page before I'm going to be able to see anything other than the default user portal page. Okay? It's just important to understand that, especially if you're managing separate subunits that you might not want to know about each other. Right? This can be important if you're, say, a managed service provider and you've purchased a K1000 with orgs for use with all your different companies that are your customers. Right? It's important to understand when you're architecting all this how you're going to operate, if you don't want each of those companies to know that the others exist when a user goes to log in to log a service ticket with you. Okay? We could talk more about that in the Q&A section if you want to. So very, very important considerations here. And Shane has dropped some links into chat as we've gone along here on various organizational things. Now, we've been harping on the whole session so far on how completely separate and distinct each org and database is from each other. However, you can't, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to build everything separately. Right? If you want very similar or the exact same things in multiple orgs, you don't have to build it from scratch in each org, at least many of the things you can build. You'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner the things that can be exported from the K1000. They can be exported as individual discrete packages that you could then turn around and import into a different K1000 or org within your K1000. right? Managed installs, notifications, processes, queues, reports, scripts, smart labels, software, inventory records, and ticket rules can be exported. Technically, they can be exported as packages and then imported either back into the same org or K1 or into a different org or K1, okay? However, notice some asterisks on this page, okay? Process, queue, and report. If I've built a report, I can export that report. However, note that I'm only exporting the report configuration, not the data that that report might be able to get me, right? The report configuration, okay? Same with the queue. When I export a service desk queue, I get all of the config, 0 of the tickets, okay? Just all of the queue configuration, but none of the tickets, right? Processes, and this one's a bit tricky. If I've built a process that calls from more than one queue, really, if it calls from anything other than the default built-in queue, right? When you first crank up a K1000, it already has a queue called the K1000 service desk baked in. You might delete that, you might rename it, but that is the default queue. And so if I build a process in that queue, then technically I could export it and import it, and everything should work if I want it to be imported into that baked-in queue in the new org that I import it into. But if I built a process around any other queue or a process that has tickets in multiple queues, while I can technically export it and import it, it's going to be effectively broken because it's going to only link into that baked-in queue that's in the other orgs. Okay? So effectively, you can't really export and import processes, even though it's technically part of the export page. Okay? Just keep that in mind. Notice what else you don't see on here. You don't see patch schedules or patch configuration. You don't see Dell updates schedules or Dell update configuration, right? There's a number of things that you might like to have be similar in various orgs, but they're not exportable and importable. You're going to need to build them each from scratch. Now, the good news is I can pull up one org if I have permissions into multiple orgs. I can pull up one org in one browser and a different org in a different browser, and I can copy and paste across browser pages, or I can just watch, look at one and configure the other one similarly with the drop downs and all that kind of stuff, right? So, for instance, building a patch schedule in one org that I've already got built in another wouldn't take but a few minutes to do that, even though I do have to build it from scratch because I can be looking at the one for reference while I'm building the other, right? So while they are separate and these things aren't moving automatically, we can move or copy what we want by exporting it from one org and importing it to another. Managed installs and scripts are a big one, right? Your managed installs and scripts can take quite a while to build and test and perfect. And once you have them built and tested and perfected, if you want to be able to deploy the Microsoft Office 2013 from this org and from another org, you don't want to have to build that from scratch every time, right, for each org. You build it in one, perfect it, export, import, export, import, export, import. Well, export once and import into all the other orgs that you want. Okay? All right? So, there we go. That's how our org feature works. That's all the pros, some of the considerations, right? That's all the basic information you need to know to decide, A, should we investigate the orgs feature or not? And B, if we do, how do we set it up? How do we configure it? What do we need to keep in mind? Okay? So with that said, done with the presentation, we're ready to open up the mics for Q&A. So Andrew's going to unmute everybody here in just a second. When he does, please note, folks, that whether you're on a phone or on a microphone, or maybe you don't even think you have a microphone, but your laptop has one baked in, I assure you, we will hear all the sound coming through your mic. So as soon as he unmutes you, just to the right of your name in the participants list, you can remute yourself until you're ready to speak with us. Of course, you also have the chat panel. If you use the chat panel, please send your chat to all panelists so all three of us can see it and answer it. You can also use the Q&A panel we'd really like to hear you, and we can get a good dialogue going. So Andrew, if you would.
Yeah.
All right. Who's got a question? Nobody's got a question? I'm pretty sure we didn't teach you everything there is to know about orgs. Got to be something else.
If we were going to add we've got a K, I guess, 1100, we don't have org supply. Is it just when we split it into enabling orgs, is it just a restore process after we enable that feature, or does it automatically carry over the existing org and just containerize it?
Okay, first of all, whoever this is, it sounds like you're across a building from your mic, so I barely heard you. But I think what I heard was you don't have orgs, but if you want to turn it on, what do you need to move or containerize?
We want to know if we do turn on organizations, will it carry the existing configuration over? Or
gotcha.
do we need to back up and
Gotcha.
restore? Does that go
Nope.
back up and restore ideal? What are we looking at?
Nope. When you turn on orgs, it takes everything that you've baked into your K1 and makes that the default org. Okay? So everything is already there. You lose nothing. Now, if you then go create a new org or more than one new org, okay, and you build out anything in there, whether you export them from default and import them over there, or you just build them from scratch or whatever, and then you disable orgs, you would lose anything other than what is in the default org. Okay, so that would be a situation where you might want to export or back up the database backup files from orgs you're going to lose if you want to keep that stuff and then put it into the default org once you've gotten rid of the orgs feature. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yes.
All right, cool.
And the patching is still scheduled at the system level, not at the org level?
Okay, so the patch configuration and the patch catalog and the patch schedules all exist within each org. The only thing that is controlled at the system level regarding patching and regarding Dell updates, since they work almost exactly alike, is the downloads of the patch signatures and patch packages, the downloads of the Dell update files from the internet to the K1000. That is controlled at the system level by a system administrator. But all of the subscriptions, all of the cataloging, labels, schedules, all of that stuff is done at the org level and so can be completely different in each org. That answer your question?
Yep. And the one question about licensing, I know you said it keeps the licensing counts at the individual org level. Is there like a report that, I know you said some reports can pull from all the orgs. Is there plans to have like for example, Microsoft licensing? That's something that we would do across all.
There are 55 reports baked in at the system level already that are built to run across the orgs, right? So there are some license compliance related reports already baked in at the system level. You can certainly customize or create your own, right? But there are already some built in at the org level, at the system level, so that should you want to report across multiple orgs instead of only within one, you could do so. Does that answer your question? Does that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah.
What else? Anybody else got a question? Andrew, Shane, did we see anything in chat that I missed?
I don't see anything in chat or in Q. Oh, wait, just got one.
A little off topic.
Hey, John, I told you, man. You get your Montana folks up there to contact the BBK team and put one together, and I will go. Tom's asking about a Montana backyard boot camp. Love to go up there sometime.
And
Anything else, folks? All righty. Well, if there is nothing else, we will go ahead and end early, give everybody a little bit of time back in their day. Thanks for coming, folks. We look forward to seeing you in the future in another KKE. Don't forget about the other resources we've shared with you. Maybe we'll see you in the BBK. Until next time, folks, have a great day.
Bye-bye, everyone.